another edition of the Badass Entrepreneurs Club. I am excited today to have Alex Sanfilippo with us, who is from PodMatch. And it's interesting that we have a PodMatch guy on a podcast. So he's going to be giving us not really advice about podcasting, but advice about the entrepreneurial journey. So I'm very excited to have you with us here, Alex. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Angela. I really appreciate it. And also, thanks for getting my last name right. I mean, I go on about 100 podcasts a year, and there's maybe 2 or 3 that get it right, and you're one of them. So I'm excited to be here.
I have a photographic memory, so my brain went for a second. It was like, is that how it was spelled, or did I say it correctly? So thank you. Appreciate that. So how did you get the entrepreneurial bug? Because a lot of people will say, I just had this spark as a grown-up, and you actually started quite young. So can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, sure. It's a funny story that you bring up here. So when I was about 10 years old, it's weird to have self-awareness at that age, but I had some self-awareness, and I realized that I had 3 younger brothers, and we had a lot of friends in the neighborhood we grew up in, which I'm so thankful for. But I realized when I was looking at my friends, looking at my brothers, they were good musicians. A lot of them were good athletes. Some of them were like straight A students. They're doing really well. And then all of them seemed to be good at video games. And I wasn't good at any of those things. And as a 10-year-old kid, actually one of the oldest of the bunch, I remember it bothered me a little bit. Like, I wasn't depressed, and I don't think I had any issues, but I just remember being like, I'm not really like all these people. And it's funny, some of them are still my best friends today. But like, when I realized that, I just kind of went on this quest to discover myself at 10. Again, super weird, probably weirder than I'm letting off. But one day I was actually across the street from our house, and we lived near a golf course. And I was actually playing on the golf course, which was a no-go. But me and my friends were there, and I found a golf ball by the water. And I picked it up. I was like, cool, a golf ball. Like, never played golf in my life. And a golfer goes riding by on his cart, and he goes, hey, kid. He goes, what does that ball say on it? And so like I turned around, I'm like, Titleist Pro V1. And he's like, I'll give you $3 for it. And I was like, it's used, I just found it. And he's like, no, that's okay, I'll take it. So I gave him the ball, and he gave me $3. And at that moment, I had like a revelation, like my first like epiphany, if you will, like as a 10-year-old kid. And I'm like, if we can find more golf balls, more golfers will buy them. And so I told all my friends that were there, there's about 4 of us. I'm like, let's start going through these lakes and see if we can find some golf balls. And we did that, and we actually set up at one of the tee boxes and just had them all organized by type and all that, and started selling golf balls. And to make a long story short, I really discovered that I loved the art of making a business. Like, I didn't even necessarily care about the money at the end of the day. I love saying, hey, you two go find some, you clean them, I'll help sell them, somebody organize them, how do we price them, how do we figure out what they cost? We need our parents to take us to a store to find out what these golf balls cost. Like, that whole side of things, I loved it. So that's kind of started my entrepreneurial bug, and I just kind of went from there. And I wasn't always an entrepreneur through my whole life or anything like that after that. But that's when I got the bug of realizing, what I'm actually good at is business. I like this.
Mm-hmm. And I think when people fall in love with the game of entrepreneurship, not just the money and the success from it, that's how you create entrepreneurs who want to be entrepreneurs for a lifetime. If you're chasing just that financial dream, it's way too hard. You have to have some fun along the way. Absolutely. So when was the next time you jumped into entrepreneurship?
So I had a lot of failed things along the way, Dr. Angela, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs like to skip that if they've made it with something, but I've had a lot of failures on the way. I did do some things in real estate that worked really well. I did like a tech startup in the real estate industry. I was building virtual tours of homes like really early on. We helped pioneer that technology, me and a group of people, and I had a staff and stuff, but then 2006 happened. Like, that's just kind of the age I was, and I had started investing in real estate as well. And to make a long story short, everyone knows what happened, 2006, 7, and 8, things just went bad. So I went from having a pretty good company to having good investment properties to being really in debt. As a matter of fact, the most in-debt 20-year-old I had ever known in my life. So like really turned on me. And at that point, I actually decided to get out of entrepreneurship. Now that I look back, I didn't realize this at that time, but that really scarred me because I was thinking my whole life I just built things for myself, but I had this massive failure. I mean, it was huge. And I needed a job, and I was scared to start anything else. Like, I was scarred from that. Like, I had like a wound that I was like, I don't know if I can heal from this. So I jumped into the corporate world. I jumped into aerospace. I just made my way into a company. I started as a part-time receiving clerk, which is code for I take out people's trash and I break down boxes. But like, I wanted my foot in the door, and I immediately really applied myself there. And I started actually working my way up through the business because of the entrepreneurial mind I had. Like, I asked questions. I found out different places that had needs. I was able to move up fairly quick, but I spent 15 years in more of a corporate setting than actually being an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. So with that scarring, I want to jump back to the 20-year-old thing, because that's a pretty vulnerable age to have something that big happen. Like, if you're 40, it sucks, but you also have all these years behind you where you've been through other situations where you go, you know what, things happen. I can move forward from this. But at 20 years old, that can be a massively life-defining and life-altering moment that can make you never want to be an entrepreneur again. So what were some of the things that you were thinking at that point that made you go, okay, no, got to get a job aside from having a bit of a setback financially?
Yeah, so I became a little bit egotistical, which I hate to admit, because now I like to believe I'm a more humble person. If you can be humble calling yourself humble, I don't know. Anyway,
well, you grew
but
up,
like I
you
just
learned
I grew up, there you go. But, you know, as a 18-year-old kid who had a lot of money and a sports car and a really pretty girlfriend at the time, you know, like I feel like I had all the things. So I started building a little bit of an ego. And like what probably hurt me more than anything than even the failure of the business was the fact that like I sold the car because I needed the cash. The girl kind of left when the cash left, if that makes sense. But anyway, like I just realized like all these things I thought I was weren't actually true. It was like a huge identity check for me. Like I realized that what I based my life on was the wrong thing. Like I fell in love with what entrepreneurship could get me instead of entrepreneurship directly. And at that point, I didn't realize it. It took me years to realize it. And the reason I jumped into corporate is because I just sat back. I'm like, okay, the whole world's like in this recession now, basically. Like, what on earth can I do that's not hurting? So I called my dad. My dad was always an entrepreneur. I'm like, hey, Dad, like, what should I do? I'm like, how's your industry? You're in aerospace. And he's like, oh, aerospace is booming. We're doing great. I'm like, cool. I'm going to find an aerospace company. I'm going to go work for, I'm going to work for an aerospace company. I'm like, Dad, do you know anybody? So I was able to get introduction and stuff like that. But that's basically, I just was like desperate at that time. My ego was shot. My identity was in check. So I was just like grabbing onto whatever I could that I didn't need to feel responsible for anymore.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because you still use the entrepreneurial mindset to set yourself up in the corporate world, because you sought out the opportunity and went after it, which is not how everyone else thinks. So it's fascinating that took you away from entrepreneurship as a complete career for 15 years. And then what eventually brought you back?
So what brought me back is I realized that I could still, like I said, like I found those gaps when I got that job. So I was breaking down boxes, emptying trash for people, right? That's where I started. But I was able to fill in gaps. And what I realized is I was an entrepreneur with inside of an organization, which I believe is great. And most people that want to be an entrepreneur, I say find a job that you can do that in. Like that's really good for a lot of people at a level of stability. Like I had health benefits for the first time. Like when I was doing the other stuff, I didn't really have health benefits. But like, so I had health benefits. I was getting a steady paycheck. I was on salary. Like it gave me cool options to be able to still flex the entrepreneurial muscles and also have the comfort of a 9-to-5 job, if you will. But what changes at 10 years, that company, for me, like my 10-year mark, the company was 30 some odd years old at this point. They actually got sold to a multi-billion-dollar organization. And right when that happened, I was like, cool, like more funding, like building bigger projects. And at this point, I was upper level management. And right when it sold, they actually promoted me to senior leadership. So I was a senior leader of the team. And at first I was like, this is great. I'm overseeing 5 departments in the company. My job was to protect the company's profit margins and to create processes to improve efficiency across the entire organization. And again, like at a multi-billion-dollar level, this thing was like massive at this point. Side note, I was never an astronaut and I was never a fighter pilot. Everyone always likes to think at some point that happened. No, I always sat behind a computer. So it's funny. Anytime I speak at a conference, one time someone raised their hand like, oh, were you ever in space? I'm like, no, that's not what aerospace is. Not for most of us. So what I realized though, like a couple months after this, like I was like, this is cool. This is fun. Like now I'm at this really high level. I went to the CEO because I added a new initiative to save us some money and actually end up doing double digits of profit. So we got more than 10% profit back in a certain department. I told him I was so excited. I called the meeting with him and he goes, yeah, I saw that in the report this morning. And he didn't sound happy. I'm like we saved that money. I'm like, that's pretty good. And he goes, the shareholders are furious. I was like, what do you mean? Turns out we didn't tell them we were going to do that. So they weren't able to go out and sell the stocks at a price that would, like everyone who owned the stocks got a big win, but they couldn't go out and sell more. And he's like, if you're going to do anything like that, just make sure you just hit the goal. And then the next month we can talk about it, or the next quarter we can talk about it. And then I also saw different, like that really was disheartening. I went back to my desk kind of like, man, like I just did something great. I almost got punished for it.
Right.
And then in that same thing, like we used to implement things within just a couple of weeks. And now I can remember like having to join committees. Like at one point I was commissioned to do the new logo for the company, like not me build it, but be on the team. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, okay, I'll go to Fiverr and I'll find somebody and they'll build a logo for the company.
Right.
No, they put together a 6-team committee that I was over, and took us 6 weeks to come up with a logo design and then 8 weeks to like roll it out or something like that. Mm-hmm. And at that point, what happened, you can probably guess, Dr. Angela, like I just wasn't an entrepreneur anymore. Like I was a cog in the machine, even at a senior level. And I'm not saying that's bad. Like that's probably the goal of most organizations. Like we want to hit that point. And when you do, the systems and structures take over. But
Mhm.
for me, I no longer felt like myself. And that was where the writing was on the wall. So it was 5 years before I actually stopped. I was like, you know what? Something has to change. I've got to get back to my roots because I'm not feeling fulfilled by this anymore.
Right. That's I love that you started at the ground level and then you worked your way up and then you really did hit the ceiling where you couldn't do what you needed to do anymore. But again, like all those lessons that you learned as an entrepreneur before were used in all those steps that you were able to follow. So that's amazing. So when you decided to get back to the entrepreneurial roots, was that a scary thing for you to do, or and leave the corporate world and the security of having insurance and everything else, or was it just you felt comfortable that this was time to break loose, unleash yourself on the world again?
I mean, I wish I could say the latter, but the truth is I was scared to death. Like
Yeah.
at first, like that when again, 5 years is a long time to be at a company when you decided you wanted to leave. And it was because I kept on failing along the way because I thought I had to have something that would be a slam dunk so I could leave the job and then start that.
Right.
And then the concept of a side hustle came to me. And I was like, I never really thought about a side hustle, like working my full-time job and taking a couple hours on the weekend or in evenings to do something. So I tried that, but I kept on failing at all these different things that I tried.
Mhm.
And that was disheartening as well because I was like, man, I used to be an entrepreneur. Now I just can't figure out good ideas anymore. So I tried for years to be able to even do that. And every time I'd fail, it'd make me more scared to leave the job. And I think that probably at year 3, I never thought I'd actually leave. Like I still wanted to, but I thought I would never leave. And I should give this disclaimer. I applied myself until the last day I was at that job. As a matter of fact, I believe firmly that the way a new season begins is the way that you end the last season you're in. So for me, actually, the last year that I was at the company, fast forward just for a moment, was my best year at the company. Like I got bonuses. Like my team was a full, like my 5 departments were the 5 top performing departments in the entire company. Like we worked really hard. So like, I wasn't not applying myself to this job. I was still working really hard.
Right.
But deep down, I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like I'm working hard, but I don't want to do this. And
Right.
yeah, I had failure after failure along the way. And it was hard for me to figure out the right formula for building a company that works.
Did you feel with that last year, with having your most successful time, did it feel like the claws of the company were trying to keep you there, or did you still feel the ability to easily leave and not have the grass be greener on the side that you just came from?
No, I felt like I was getting myself deeper into a hole. Like I was digging for gold and getting closer, but I can't get out of this hole anymore type of thing. That's kind of that's the way I describe it. No, it definitely felt that way. And some days that was depressing, and other days I was like, well, me and my wife are living a really comfortable life and enjoying it, but comfortable never really sounded good to me. I always wanted to to do something, right? To push something. And I don't necessarily care about comfort.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the entrepreneurial attitude, is being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being able to launch
Yes.
yourself forward. So what was the next endeavor that came after your venture into aerospace?
So what ended up happening is I started a podcast, and it's about 2 years before I left. I started, or I should say, a year and a half before I left. And I realized that the podcast got a lot of traction. So I'm like, oh, I'm actually good at this. Like, I'm good at podcasting. Like, maybe there's something there. How on earth do you monetize this? And along the way, I failed at monetizing a podcast as well. But I'm like, you know what? My show's still going to go because I'm having fun doing this. And then I just realized that there were so many people in podcasting that were interested in just helping, adding value. So I really actually fell in love with podcasters in general. Like I became passionate about the industry. So I started speaking at conferences and traveling all over the place, like really just enjoying it. And then one day, it was actually one of my guests on my show talked about how he said the best entrepreneurs don't come up with ideas. And that like triggered something in me. I'm like, what do you mean the best entrepreneurs don't come up with ideas? I'm like, that's what entrepreneurs do. And he goes, you come up with solutions to problems that people you care about have. And the guy just told me this. I'm like, so hold on, like just to repeat that. I come up with solutions to problems people I care about have. And in my head, I was like, okay, like a week after that, I went to a podcasting conference. I was speaking. There's about 2,000 people there. I told my wife, when I get off stage, people are going to line up to talk to me, not because I'm a great speaker, but because somebody wants to talk to the speaker, right? Like somebody, doesn't matter if they could just be telling me I did a bad job. But anyway, when people lined up, I kept track of how many people said certain things that they were struggling with because I asked. I'm like, oh, thanks for listening. Hey, what are you struggling with as a podcaster? And about 100 people said the same thing. It was a variation of, I can't find guests for my show, or I'm having trouble being a guest on other people's shows because I need to get out there and spread my brand a little bit more. Those two things, about 100 people said that. And for the first time, a light bulb went off that wasn't my idea. It was a potential solution for a problem that people I cared about had. And that's where PodMatch came from. That's how it was born. And that was kind of the beginning of the end, if you will.
Perfect. So I'm sure people are kind of curious if they haven't come across PodMatch. They're curious what this actually is. So do you want to give us a little bit of detail on that?
Sure. Yeah. Good call, Dr. Angela. I appreciate that. PodMatch is a service that automatically connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. So think about like your favorite online dating app. It's very similar to that in the sense of it's looking for people that are similar or looking to have or that have the same expertise and actually putting them together. So as a host, I'm able to say I want my next guest to be a podcast expert, and then I'm gonna go ahead and it'll automatically match with that, and it'll help you find those people you can message in the system and schedule and all that. So the whole idea is it's kind of your one-stop shop for getting guests for your show or being a guest on shows.
So it's like the Tinder of podcast matching.
There, sure, yeah. Dr. Angela, how long have you been married? Have you ever used Tinder? I just got to ask.
I have used Tinder. I was actually surfing yesterday, and we
Oh,
were
okay,
having this
nice.
whole conversation about Tinder, and my surfing instructor was shocked that I was on Tinder not that long ago, and I'm like, but how else do you meet people? So I love that
You know what? I saw the
created
wrong.
podcast
I'm
on
looking at
Tinder.
your rings. For anybody listening, I was looking at the video and I thought that your ring was on a different finger. I am wrong. So yeah, you use it. I've been married too long to use Tinder. So it's funny when I came up with the idea, I actually downloaded dating apps. I told my wife and created a fake account on them so I could see how they work, which was
Right.
probably terrible. I didn't mean to lead anybody on, but I was really curious to make sure we could build something similar to what was working.
Yeah, that's amazing. So with what you've created, how long has PodMatch been around?
So we got the idea, like that idea hit a whiteboard on March 10th, 2020, and we launched into an early beta on June 15th, 2020.
So just as the pandemic was happening, you had this brilliant idea and launched it.
Yeah, yep.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So your timing was impeccable, obviously, because so many people went from being able to network in person or have people come to meetings, meet them in coffee, meet them for coffee, and that all just disappeared. So you suddenly had this amazing platform appear for people to use. Did it take long for it to actually take off? Because people come up with great ideas and then sometimes it's like wah, 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 and it takes forever for people to actually notice what's going on.
So that's a good question. And I'm sure for most people that is the path. For us, it wasn't. I'm so thankful for this. But those 100 people that said they had the problem, I got their information. So I was like, okay, let me hold on to your email address. I say information. I just got their email addresses. So I got their email addresses, and I was already a bit of a name in podcasting. I'm not like a huge podcaster, but I've been speaking to conferences, and a lot of people knew me in that space that wanted to help me succeed. So the day we launched, we actually had almost 1,000 people join on the very first day. So we launched with 100 people, and from there they just shared it with their friends, and it blew up really fast. And it was mostly podcast hosts, but because of the time, again, the timing being right, every keynote speaker that was used to getting paid 100 grand to go on stage or 10 grand to go on stage now had no platform. So out of nowhere, we started having all these huge keynote speakers join saying, I just want to speak. I'm not trying to charge anybody. So these hosts on there that have been podcasting for 4 months were like, oh my gosh, my dream guest reached out to me to be like, they reached out to me to be on my show. So we had this giant influx of just some of like the world's greatest speakers join all at one time. And really that propelled us to just get bigger podcasts started joining. And it worked really well for us. Just from day one, we could see the writing on the wall. Not that we were like making tons of money on day one. We actually I don't even think we had it monetized. The idea was let's just get it out there and see if it's helping people. Yeah. But we started seeing some traction right away.
And that's one of the things that happens sometimes. Sometimes you have to fight really hard to make your entrepreneurial endeavor work. And then sometimes the stars just align and it takes off like a shot. So that's amazing that you actually had that impeccable timing, but had a solution that's necessary. So for people, this is like, I have a lot of clients who have podcast hunters, we'll call it. There's a different word for it, but it's evading me. So if they have a podcast hunter who's manually doing this, what's the difference between that and what your platform is doing?
So yeah, that's a good question. So like I would consider like maybe a booking agent or something like that. Yeah, there we go. So the big difference is the fact that you just set your profile up and you describe your ideal guest, and you can change that at any time. And then the system will automatically match you with people. Now, again, it's automated. There's about 40 different pieces of criteria. I mean, it looks from things for like, if it's a female only podcast, it's not going to show you male. It's not going to show you males. If you are in Europe and you are only available in US time for a couple hours a day, it's not going to match you with people that aren't matched that time. So 40 different things that actually go into the matching criteria. And the idea is it's going to give you at least a really good lead. They're not all slam dunks, obviously, but it's going to give you, filter them like straight into you, like into your account. So you can just see these people yourself and decide yes or no. If you want them, you still have the choice. But that's the big difference, is it's bringing people to you. And the other thing I really like about it is it's people that are looking for guests or looking to be a guest. Like because sometimes we'll reach out to people and they're like, no, I'm just not interested. I'm not doing this right now. If they're on the platform, it's because they signed up, because they want to be there. So it makes it pretty easy to know that you're reaching out to somebody that could very well potentially be a guest for you.
Amazing. And if someone has, like, there's people out there, including in my client base, who have more than one podcast. Can they set up more than one account, or is it only one and done?
So it's one podcast per account. People can, if they have multiple email addresses, they can do it that way. Or if you're like managing a bunch of them, we have an agency account where we can have up to 300 either podcast or guest accounts, or mix and match on one dashboard where you can just kind of switch between them all. So those are kind of our options for that.
Perfect. And can I ask how you're monetizing it? Because we come up with these entrepreneurial endeavors, and some people starve while serving the world, and then some people have the ability to actually make some money from this. And I know when I went on it, I went and checked it out. There's a free account that I can set up, but there has to be, like, is it sponsorship, or is it we can upgrade and create a even better way to hunt on the platform?
Yeah. So yeah, great question here. So yeah, we have the free base version. The idea is like the network effect. It becomes more valuable, more people on it, right? So we have the free version, which is called our basic plan. And then we have a professional plan, which right now, as we're recording, is sitting at $39 a month. And that's for somebody that wants to get even more matches. What I find is people with multiple podcasts, really, that they upgrade a lot so they have even less work to do. You get far more people reaching out to you, or people that do like multiple episode releases per week, which I still think, by the way, Dr. Anglea, is crazy. Like some of my friends, they podcast 5 days a week. I'm like, I don't know how you do it. But they're the people that are upgrading because they need a lot of guests, and they're always looking. So it has that, and has some other core features as well that make it really, we call it professional plan, because the idea is we don't want everyone to upgrade to it. It doesn't need to be that. It's just like the really serious people that are really trying to take podcasting as far as it can go, whether they're on the guest or host side. In addition to that, we have the agency model, which is a completely paid model because it's representation. Most of those people, their clients are paying them hundreds, if not more, dollars per month to actually manage their account for them.
Perfect. And if someone is wanting to avoid the agency side of it and just leverage your platform, can they really run their whole podcast and find guests and get matched on other people's podcasts completely through your thing, or do they still need some of that manual work done?
So it depends. Some hosts really like to control themselves. So like if I'm a guest and I message some host, they want you to go to like their Google Doc and fill it out. And so if they take you straight off the platform, we can't do anything about that. They can do that in the messages if they want. But PodMatch is set up when you message back and forth, the other person whoever started the conversation then puts the ball in the other person's court. They can hit match or pass. So if they hit match, from there, the guest actually has access to the host calendar, given they loaded it in there, and they can actually schedule it right there. And then you don't have to ever exchange emails or anything like that. You can technically do it all from right there. It'll be on your dashboard so you know where you're going. It's on your Google Calendar, whatever it is that you use. So yeah, the idea is it could be a one-stop shop. Again, some hosts, they have their system already, and so they kind of pull people off the platform pretty quick. But for me, I do everything through PodMatch because I don't want the administrative work. Like that was one of the points for me. I didn't like that part. I always seem to put things the wrong day in the calendar somehow, sometimes the wrong month. So I prefer to have somebody else do that for me.
So one thing, like I know there's a lot of people who are considering podcasts, or maybe they started one and then it didn't get as much traction, and so they backed out of doing it and shut the whole thing down. What are the major benefits that you see for people who are doing their own podcast? Because it's one thing to be a guest and just be like, oh, I'm just going to go and talk about my stuff. But it's another thing to actually be a host. And there's benefits, there's pros and cons to both sides of it. But for the person who wants to start their podcast, what is the massive benefit that they should be considering to actually motivate them to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'm going to say this: podcasting, being the host, it's a labor of love. Like Dr. Angela, you know it. Like your side of the mic right now versus mine. When I'm done, I turn off my camera. I'm going to go outside and go enjoy the sun here in Florida. You've got editing. You've got like all the administration that goes with it. Like it's a labor of love. You have to decide that you want to do it. But really, it sets you apart. And even if you only have, like, let's imagine that you have 50 people who listen to your podcast. Like, let's just pretend it's 50 people per week or per month or whatever. A lot of us have been conditioned because of social media to say that's not a lot of people.
Right.
But here's the difference. Social media, people can scroll right past. Even if they're liking your stuff, most people are looking at it for less than a second. They're not reading it all. If someone's listening to you on a podcast, it means they really trust you, because it's no different than butts sitting in seats. It's just, it's the same as someone sitting in a spot listening to you. So if there's 50 people every week sitting in a chair waiting for you to show up to talk to them, to teach them something, would you show up every week? And the answer to everybody is, yeah, I would never stop doing that. I would show up every single week. The problem is we get the wrong perspective. We think it should be really big numbers like it is on social media. But the truth is, if you even just have a few hundred people listening to your podcast consistently, even if you're doing interviews like this, they still trust you, the host, as the person to lead them in the direction that they should go. And those people will just become more and more fond of you over time. And as long as you don't abuse that relationship, they'll buy things from you. They'll be there with you when you need to test something. I mean, time and time again, I've been able to ask for something on my podcast, and I'll have hundreds of people email me saying, oh yeah, I'll definitely help you with that. What do you need? What are you looking for? Because I have built that rapport with those people. People do business and hang out with who they know, like, and trust. And podcasts enable that to happen. So for me, podcasting is something I will always have in my life. I think it's amazing, not just as a host, but also being able to just listen to the people that I trust and I'm able to just build that relationship with.
I agree. And for people who are trying to build out their personal brands, it's an amazing thing to do because it showcases that you aren't just like a know-it-all, which sometimes if you're just creating thought leadership content, it can appear that way. But when you're actually willing to bring on other people and have them share their opinion on your show, I think that is a big part of actually building out your reputation as well, because it shows that you can take a back seat and put someone else in the spotlight, which for some people is a really, really scary thing to do. But what I honestly, for me, why I do the podcast is I love hearing people's stories, and it opens my mind to completely different possibilities. It changes the way that I do my content because I've been inspired by something that reminded me of something from my past, or it completely exposed me to something new. So I see massive benefits for people, but I know as you said, it's a labor of love. It's a big endeavor to jump into it. And you have to have the drive to keep going with it. Otherwise, it's easy to just throw your hands up and be like, oh, this isn't working. Shut her down.
Yeah, I have two things to say to that. First off, you're one of the best podcasters I've actually ever had the opportunity to do an interview with. Like you're great at this. So please don't stop. The other thing for people that are listening is that consistency is the name of the game. When I got started, I'm like, what do I need to do to be a super successful podcaster? The same advice came to me time and time again. Be consistent. If you tell your audience you're showing up every week, be there every single week. Never miss a week. And I'm like, well, what if my podcast isn't growing? Stay consistent. Keep on going. And people were right. At one point, about at 1 year mark, I saw a little bit of a dip. And since then, it's been growing. But sometimes it's only 1 or 2% per month. But at the end of the day, it is still growing. So the longer I do this, the more it will continue to grow. And so I think the number one piece of advice I give anyone who's starting a podcast, make sure you can do it and commit to a set period of time. If you decide I committed to 1 year when I started. And if you commit to 1 year, don't stop before that, but just say, hey, I'm going to give this a shot for 1 year and be consistent and show up and I'm going to see what happens. But don't just after 3 weeks be like, I'm not getting as many downloads as Joe Rogan, so I guess I'm out, right? Like you can't do that. You have to keep on trying and going for it.
Absolutely. Is there any other advice you want to give us before we head out today?
Yeah, so definitely. And this has been a blast. I want to just kind of finish my story of coming back into entrepreneurship. I'll keep this really brief, but obviously when I started PodMatch, I mentioned it wasn't monetized from day one, but the writing was on the wall. As we got closer to the end of 2020, I realized that I had to make a choice because the hours I was spending in my corporate job, which again, I don't forget what I said earlier, I finished that job better than I started. I did a really good job. But I realized that the time I was at work was directly starting to impact how much PodMatch was growing. It wasn't growing as fast because I wasn't there. And that's when I had to have a serious conversation with my wife, who had only known me as a corporate guy, a guy who had really good health benefits, who made a really comfortable life for us. Like that's what she knew me as. And when I told her, I think I need to quit and I think I need to take no salary for some time, for as long as it takes, right? That was scary. And it was a calculated risk that I took. I wasn't just being like, oh, I think it's going to do good, let's stop. I calculated. I said, you know what, this pace, before 1 year is up, I will be able to replace the salary if we keep at the projection we're going. But it was scary. I'll tell you what, when I walked into the office to leave, I talked about how I felt like I was digging for gold and I got so deep I couldn't get out of the hole anymore. I felt like I was forcing myself out, giving it every piece of energy. The courage it took to go into my CEO's office to tell him I was leaving was probably it was probably in the top 3 scariest experiences of my life. The other one I'd compare it to was asking my wife to marry me, and who knows what the other one was. But it was scary. And so I went in there. I told him, I'm like, I think I need to go. And he's like, man, it's pandemic. You can't find a job out there. He wasn't trying to scare me, but he's just like, dude, you have good health benefits. What if something happens? What if you or your wife get sick? What are you all going to do? Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting there, just kind of got quiet. I'm like, I just have to do this. And he's like, you don't care about the money anymore. I was like, no. And he's like, then there's nothing I can say. He's like, I wish you all the best. And that day, I remember walking out of that office, and I put in a notice. It wasn't like my last day there. Actually, for corporate purposes, I had to give a 90-day notice. But December 7th, 2020 was my last day there. And I'll never forget walking out of that office after 15 years of being there, realizing like, I left them in good hands, but now I'm on to this next scary adventure. So I say all that just to say that, like, take calculated risks, sacrifice the good for the sake of the potential great. And as an entrepreneur, I promise you the opportunities are always there. Always have that mindset of abundance. Never let fear hold you back, because you'll never live up to the greatness that you have, and the ability you have to serve the world you don't want that to leave. Like, you don't want to leave that at the grave, the potential that you had. So always go after it. But anyway, that's my advice to everybody, and kind of how I wanted to finish off this story.
Love it. So if someone wants to learn more about PodMatch or just wants to know more about you, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so thank you. PodMatch is at podmatch.com. Pretty easy. If you want to find out more about me, everything I do is at creatingabrand.com. That's also the name of my podcast. So creatingabrand.com, you can find me there. But honestly, Dr. Angela, I wasn't just blowing smoke. Like, you're one of the best podcasters I've ever had the opportunity to talk to. So I highly recommend the audience stick with Dr. Angela. She's taking you all places, and she's going places herself. So thank you for having me. But this is the right place to be hanging out. So thank you again.
Thanks for coming. So that concludes our episode of the Badass Entrepreneurs Club. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your time with us, Alex. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.